Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. We are thinking about summer and wine as we record episode 45. But in typical Foretop style, we will grapple with some serious heavy issues relating to climate and the environment before retreating to the lighter, more frivolous topic of rosé. I'm joined for this episode by Dr. Greg Jones, director of the Grace and Ken Evenstad Center for Wine Education, and the chair in wine studies and professor of environmental studies at Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
Thank you for having me.
And Jordan Michelman, beverage journalist and co-founder of the online publication Sprudge.
Hello, thanks for having me back.
Nice to have you back. And Hannah Wallace, a journalist covering food, wine, and agriculture for publications such as Vogue and Civil Eats. Hi, Hannah. It's so good to see you again.
Thanks for having me again.
I'm so happy you rode your bike here.
It's always fun.
Now it's time for our first course, kind of a downer, but we'll try to make it light. Climate change and wine. We've all seen the starving polar bear video on YouTube, but forget about those cute animals. Let's focus on the true victim of climate change, wine. But in all seriousness, millions of jobs rely on the ability of certain grape varieties to grow in certain regions of the world. How soon will these regions be forced to switch gears, ending traditions that have lasted decades, if not centuries? Dr. Jones, hit us with the bad news.
Well, I guess my first question is, why do you call it a downer?
I don't know.
Well, I think, this is a scientific issue. It's a societal issue, and it's something I think that we need to be optimistic about being both a part of the solution and a part of the problem. But I don't like to talk about it as a downer because that makes everybody feel very pessimistic about kind of where we are in our world today. We have climate change issues going on clearly, and the climates have changed tremendously over the past couple of hundred years, and likely are going to do so even in the next few hundred years at about the same rate, if not even more. But the issue is that we need to be optimistic about how we can address climate change, either as a society in our kind of responses to it, or as a business like the wine industry being able to produce some kind of adaptive capacity to be able to produce good wines even in the future.
Well, I have read that the wine producers in the United Kingdom are kind of excited about climate change.
Well, sure. I was at the International Cool Climate Conference a couple of years ago, and people from all over the world on the fringes of 50 to 55 degrees of latitude in the Northern Hemisphere are all very excited about it. There's a conference this summer in Sweden that is looking at cool climate viticulture in Scandinavia. They have a vibrant industry now. It's not as big as what we might have here in Oregon or California, of course, but it's pretty vibrant, and they're excited about it.
But what about the regions that are going to have to completely switch gears? I mean, like Oregon, where we grow mostly Pinot Noir, and I've been reading that our producers are going to have to switch over to Tempranillo.
Sure,
in a few decades.
I think a lot of
Would that be such a bad thing?
Well, exactly. Well, I think the perspective really is that what kind of time frame are we talking about? If you go back in time to the first pioneers coming to Oregon, the climates were not very conducive for growing grapes here in the 50s and 60s. That was pretty clear. And you fast forward to today, and the suitability and the productive capability year in, year out is pretty strong. And so, climates have changed over a very short period of time to make Oregon more suitable. We're still in the Pinot Noir sweet spot, so to speak, in terms of climate, and likely will be for maybe another couple of decades. However, that does not mean that we should kind of put all our eggs in one basket by just growing Pinot Noir. We should think about other things as well. And any good grape grower would be doing that. They'd be experimenting with something that may be right on the fringes of being able to produce in that region. And I think we're already seeing that from Oregon producers. And so there's some new things out there that are fun and exciting, and I think it will continue.
Hannah, you sounded like you were excited about Tempranillo.
Well, we were talking about Tempranillo earlier and about how Abasella, your parents own Abasella down in Southern Oregon, and their Tempranillo is so delicious. So I wouldn't be sad about that. But yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know a ton about this issue, but I don't know if you guys read that story in the New York Times on Sunday about like rare grape varietals, and just how we need to bring them back because there's so few of them, and there's all sorts of historical and political reasons why these grapes have not been grown for many centuries. But a lot of he was focusing on Switzerland in the op-ed. It was in the Weekend Review section, but I wonder if that sort of thing might start to happen more. So we go back to growing grapes that haven't been grown for a long time, sort of the same way that people are rediscovering heirloom varietals of food, vegetables.
Sure. That's a good point, Hannah. I think the framework is that today there's about 20 varieties that are producing maybe about 85% of the wine worldwide. And so I think the international marketplace kind of drives some of that a little bit, but some of the real obscure varieties from different places in Italy and Greece and Portugal are lovely. It's just that how do we better understand how they perform, in what type of a climate, what type of a soil.
Which clones are the right clones.
Yeah, which clones are the right clones. And does the market then open itself up to a new name, a new variety, a new type of wine?
Oh, I think wine drinkers are always open to trying new things, or at least most wine drinkers are.
I have to stop you guys for a moment. Clone is a cultivar of a grape variety for those folks who don't follow this wine geeky world the way we do.
I was curious, Catherine, you mentioned there being excitement in the United Kingdom about, sort of a jaded excitement about climate change because it was maybe going to represent some opportunities for them. And I know Dr. Johns, you mentioned Scandinavia, but in Vermont and Quebec as well, there's like a tremendous amount of excitement around what's happening there for possibility and wine production there. And that's something that some of it is with less commonly seen grape varieties, but some of it is with stuff that we're familiar with as well. And some of those wines are extraordinary. So if it means we get to drink more of that stuff, I'm all for it.
Well, you're talking about some of the places in Canada. Nova Scotia is a wonderful wine region today and has a lot of potential. Over in the Bay of Fundy region, where I think scallops are the most famous product, there's quite a few wine areas that have developed there, and they're producing lovely wines. But you're right, they're doing some international varieties like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and Riesling, but they're also doing some that we haven't heard much of.
And I think this is Hannah talking. I think if we're talking about climate change, we have to talk about drought, of course, and and water usage. And so if climate change is going to push people to be more conscientious about how they use water, I think that's a good thing. A couple of years ago, I did a story for Oregon Business about kind of the influx of California winemakers and French winemakers in the Oregon, and mostly in the Willamette Valley, but up to Oregon. And one of the wine real estate people I interviewed for that article said that he heard from a number of California winemakers who were looking for properties up here that part of the reason they were moving to Oregon was because they're worried about the drought and the future of being a winemaker who doesn't have water rights or who doesn't have access to a lot of water or has to conserve water. They want to have plenty of water. So I think it may be moving people north, but it also may be making people more responsible because you can grow. There are winemakers in California and Napa who don't irrigate. So it's possible to do.
And you have another good point there, Hannah, that we get refugees here in Oregon. We're also getting a lot of refugees from Burgundy. I don't think they're not grappling with drought. They're grappling with just a more volatile climate, would you say, Dr. Jones?
Well, especially in the past 10 years or so. But I would argue that they're actually doing something pretty smart. They're geographically diversifying their risk. If they produce Pinot Noir in two of the best places in the world to do it, and the climate or the vintage variation is such that you can hedge your bets a little bit in terms of that risk, it's a smart thing to do. You think about some of the biggest wine companies in the world today, they don't grow grapes just in one country or one state. They're diversified across multiple different regions. And so I think, the Willamette Valley and Burgundy are clearly close together in terms of their parallel for production. And so I could see more companies doing the same. We're starting to see some Oregonians go that way as well.
It's true.
Really? I didn't know that. Who?
Well, Domaine Serene has a property in Santenay. And there's a few others. I was just there in January, and I ran into somebody from North Carolina, and he's gone there to grow grapes and make wine. And so very interesting.
Interesting. Reverse.
Well, it's cooler in Burgundy than North Carolina.
Yeah.
So.
But I think one of the things that you bring up, Catherine, though, that it's really important is that Agriculture depends upon multiple different things. Number one, a baseline climate that makes everything suitable for production. You need to have enough water to be able to grow the crop. Some crops need more, of course, than others. But you also have to be concerned about variability in the climate. How much variability there is in like hail events or heavy rain events, frost, freezes. Those kind of things I think are probably more of a concern for me as we go into the future, because changes in average climate are adaptable pretty easily in agribusinesses. But when you start talking about real wide swings between drought periods, heavy wet periods versus winter freezes and frosts, those are hard to plan for because you don't have mechanisms that you can work with that are real effective in a vineyard.
And those swings also affect things like pests and mold and rot, right?
Well, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the other underlying point maybe we should make is that grapes are more kind of fragile than many other crops, are they not? I mean, they're perennial. They aren't replanted annually, so they live a long time, and they're a little more delicate. They have those tiny flowers that can be knocked off by rain or hail. It's not like a zucchini plant that just kind of grows anywhere you plant it.
Well, one of the ways to describe it is that broadacre crops like wheat and soybean, rice, and corn can be grown across a fairly wide geography and therefore a wide climate. Wine grapes are only pretty much mid-latitude to slightly higher latitude type of producers. And so when you look at the entire spectrum of Vitis vinifera, the European wine grape variety, it has a very narrow climate and geography. But if you take any individual variety like Pinot Noir or something, on a cool climate side, it even has a more narrower niche. So small changes in climate mean a lot to a given variety, more so than it would be for the entire spectrum of the species.
Well, now that you've got me feeling a little more upbeat about climate change,
Good.
I guess we can move on to our next course, wildfire wines. Last autumn, wildfires famously devastated Napa and Sonoma, and closer to our studio here at OPB, our own Columbia River Gorge in Oregon was hit really hard by forest fires. It's never a good time to be in the path of a fire, but the sad truth is that wildfire season tends to fall right around the time when winemakers are harvesting in late summer and early autumn. Hannah Wallace, you have been covering the intersection between the environment and the wine industry in your work, so I wondered if you have any thoughts about wildfires and wines?
Yes, and let me just preface this by saying I haven't yet written about this subject, but I have done a little research over the past couple of days. And so as I understand it, most of the Northern California harvest had come in by the time the wildfires hit there. So I would say about 10% of Napa grapes were affected and 10% of Sonoma grapes were affected. Those were, the fire happened in early October. So those were mostly the late varietals, late ripening varietals like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. But the winemakers who make those are like often they're big cash, wines and most popular wines. And so the winemakers are really grappling with how to deal with this. I think in some cases you see winemakers who are sending it to labs and having it tested and finding that it does have the markers for smoke taint, in which case they then sell it to the bulk market. And then you'll see other winemakers who are doing carefully controlled experiments, because what happens is it's kind of a complicated process, but if you don't taste it at first, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have smoke taint. So you could taste it and then it ferments and these compounds will change during the fermentation process and then you might taste smoke later. So you have to keep tasting and be very sort of vigilant with and I don't think any of these people want to sell the wine if there is smoke taint in it. So I'm not really sure. There's going to be a lot of loss, I think.
Yeah, and this isn't the smoky flavor of a nicely, lightly charred barrel. This is kind of medicinal and
like licking an ashtray is what people
icky.
say. Yeah. It doesn't sound very appetizing.
Oh.
Yeah. Although interesting that you say that, because there is one of the compounds, I forget how you pronounce it, maybe you can help me with this, is found in Syrah. Anyway, so it's a similar compound that is naturally found in certain varietals.
Glycosol.
I think that's it, or maybe something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious to ask if there were any winemakers that were trying to kind of lean into it, like put out a wine that's sort of, I mean, and I know that it wouldn't really taste like a smoked beer or like a smoked cocktail or something, but where they're kind of trying to own it and be like, this is like a smoked wine.
That is such a good question, Jordan. I haven't heard of any, but I was asking that question initially. I spoke to John Williams at Frog's Leap Cellar and was, one of my questions was sort of like, so is this a crazy question, but is anyone figuring this is like kind of like terroir, like, like this fire happened. It was beyond our control. Like, we're just going to go with it. No one that I've heard of. I mean, I think it's seen as a flaw.
Yeah.
But that said, all these people who are selling it to the bulk market, it's going to be out there. Right. So we don't necessarily know because it'll be, private label wines or,
It'll be sold in another state or another region.
Yeah. Yeah. So we might be tasting some smoky, strange wines from 2017, but we might not necessarily know it because I think a lot of the winemakers who have these grapes are not going to put it under their name.
Sure.
I actually will say there was a wildfire in the gorge in 2002, and I was covering wine way back then, the Sheldon Ridge fire, and the varieties that were growing out there were Syrah and I think Zinfandel, and they took well to the smoke taint. And the winemakers were saying, well, I would definitely not put this in a smoky barrel. It already tastes like this. But they were bottling it and selling it. And I think it was probably less of an effect than some of those wineries in California were getting. But
So there's a lot of dependencies on when the fire occurs, how much smoke is actually in the vineyard. Because the Willamette Valley didn't have much impact this past year, mostly because the fire was at higher elevation or higher altitude in the atmosphere. So it never was in the vineyard. And the worst time to have smoke taint really be a problem is right around an event called veraison in the grape life cycle. It's when it starts changing color and taking on sugar and flavor. That's when it's susceptible to absorbing these volatile phenols. And so if a fire happens before that or after that, it's much less of an issue.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So this is one of the things that I think the most research is pointing to. The other piece of it is like Hannah said, we don't have all the clues about how to deal with this. There's a lot of research going on trying to figure out, okay, what is it? How do you deal with it before you go through fermentation or after? But there's just not a lot of answers.
Yeah, so one thing John Williams told me from Frog's Leap in Napa was that the thought or the sort of general consensus right now seems to be the less skin contact, the better. So you would think that people who are growing Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon would want to make rosés. However, I talked to Peter Brem at Brem Vineyards in the Gorge, and he was severely affected by the wildfires in the Gorge, and he said he did an experiment. He sent one of his growers actually had the grapes tested at ETS, this testing lab that people send wine to and send grapes to, and found that it was like just slightly higher in the markers for smokiness. So he ended up sending a couple tons of the Pinot Noir to Walla Walla Community College to have them do some experiments with it, and they did a rosé, and they bottled it and sold it, and they said it was great. And then they did I think one was 7-day skin contact, one was 30-day skin contact, and last he had heard.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Skin contact.
Got to talk about that. Okay.
Is basically the skin's macerating in the juice of the grapes. Okay, keep talking.
Yes. So 7 days, right? So
it's not a sexy thing.
Not a sexy thing, but it's what makes it a red wine. And they did a tasting. This was back in February. I didn't get a chance to talk to the guy from Walla Walla Community College. But anyway, he said it tasted fine. And in fact, I think he said, I actually quoted him, he said that the guy at the community college said, it doesn't taste like a Pinot Noir, but wow, it has a lot going on for the 30-day skin contact. So that could be, maybe, and maybe it just depends on when you open the bottle because these things don't stop changing, right? So you could open the bottle or it could come out in the bottle after you've already bottled it. So
yeah, Hannah, that thing you quoted of saying there's a lot going on, I see it as potentially being compelling for consumers. Like, I feel like there's a way you could talk about wine with smoke contact on it, whether or not it's sort of saying, oh, this is a wine for Scotch lovers, or here's a real barbecue wine.
Or if you're a smoker, maybe you would love it.
Yeah, sure. That's right. The ashtray cuvee.
Someone's got to do it, right?
I don't know if it's necessarily going to be for like really discerning wine drinkers, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong. But
maybe we should do a tasting, actually.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know who is like trying to lean into it a little bit.
Yeah, me too. No, it's a good question.
Well, and Jordan, I know Sprudge covers coffee as well, and occasionally beer. And so I'm sure you know about this phenomenon of kind of the mashup beverages where they. Well, I think I read about a coffee beer in Sprudge. Yeah. So, I mean, do you think consumers are a little more open to the idea of sort of an alien flavor?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really do. I think that consumers, especially a consumer who's maybe kind of oriented towards like being interested in whatever you want to define natural wine as, I could see selling them on like, hey, here's this natural thing that happened while we were trying to make the wine naturally. So, check it out kind of a thing. I can see it. I see it being like potentially compelling from like a marketing or like talking about what happened kind of standpoint.
Yeah, and maybe it doesn't sell for as much as it would have sold, before the smoke taint, but you could still sell it if you leaned into it. I think you have a really good point, Jordan.
And why not make it a fundraiser for,
That's a great idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that this brings up for me is that when you leave a little bit of residual sugar in a wine, so you don't ferment it all the way to dryness, a little bit of sugar hides certain flaws in wine. So maybe a smoke-tainted wine with a little bit of sugar left in it could be palatable or sellable in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Sounds kind of unappealing to me. But I do get what you're saying. Well, I can actually tie our first topic with our second topic. I looked up the article I wrote way back in the Stone Age in 2004 about this wildfire and these wildfire wines. And I was speaking with a producer in Southern Oregon who said that the wildfires down there positively affected them because they were getting too much heat and too much sunlight, and the smoke in the sky was cooling off the vineyards. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, Catherine, I actually think that happened this past year as well here in Oregon. The issue with smoke particles in the atmosphere, if it's up high enough in the atmosphere, it acts to reflect solar radiation away. So it will keep the temperature down. There's been some research in different places that says that for a given thickness of smoke, you can have a 1, 2, or 3 degree Fahrenheit reduction in the temperature at the surface. And so that's what I think a lot of people were talking about. And I know that was pretty much the case here within this region, both in the Willamette and down in the Umpqua and the Rogue as well, because we had some days right around those heat events that we had around Labor Day last year. I think that having some smoke in the air kept our temperatures down from what it could have been up in the hundreds here every day.
But it also felt like hell on earth here in Portland, at least, with the ash falling from the sky. Do you remember that, Jordan?
Yes, I do. I do, Catherine. It was the worst. We fled to San Francisco. My wife and I took our baby to San Francisco for like 10 days to get away from it and have airflow again.
Yeah, you don't want a little baby breathing that in.
Yeah, it was bad.
But then Oakland experienced the same thing after the fires in Sonoma. My friend lives in Oakland, and she said there were days and days of smoke coming down from Napa and Sonoma. So you couldn't escape it for long.
Well, it goes back to the climate change thing, right? Or at least so goes the thinking. That here on the West Coast and the Northwest, we may be looking forward to like a fire season every year. Doesn't that sound nice? That's
depressing.
Well, I think, I hear a lot of people talking about the fires in California saying that they were surprised that it didn't happen sooner, this kind of thing, because that's we live in a Western environment that is summer dry, and all we have to do is have a little variation in that dryness. And there are so many people out and about in our environments that, have one little mistake happen, whether it be a chainsaw in the woods or a lawnmower or, in California, there's been some blame put on the electrical companies down there for maybe a spark coming off of one of their transmitters. And so, just anything in our dry environment like that could produce a really major fire event.
That's interesting, Dr. Jones, that climate change, it's good if you're a Newfoundland winemaker, but if you live in a heavily forested area, maybe not so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, on that happy note, I think we need to drink some rosé.
I agree.
Jordan, I'm going to pour some into your glass.
Okay, thank you.
Right now.
I appreciate it. Oh, thanks.
That's good.
What is this rosé that you're pouring? Tell us about it.
Good audio there. You know what? It literally just arrived. It's a sample. Even though my rosé book was published more than a year ago, I'm still receiving random rosé samples.
I'm not surprised, Catherine. That's not surprising.
So I received a box of all these Provence rosés that had fancy-looking bottles and fancy names that don't seem to relate to anything. So this is just called Urban.
It's good. I like it.
And it has a catchy typeface that's sort of Texan cowboy.
Yes. When one thinks of Provençal rosé, one instantly thinks of urban areas. Right?
And what did you say? This looks like a perfume bottle?
Like a perfume, yeah, like a fancy perfume bottle, yeah. But like the really big format kind, you would see like at the dollar store, kind of.
Oh yeah, like the ones everyone's grandmother used to have on their chest of drawers.
The like perfect like 10-year-old gift to give to someone that you like don't know any better.
It got me to thinking you should write a book on some other things as well, like maybe blue cheese or, ham or something, and you get all kinds of things.
All the blue cheese just sitting in my, sitting on my porch until I get home.
You're going to get urban blue cheese samples a year later.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our third course. Since this episode is going live in early June, the very start of summer, when rosés appear like clockwork in every wine shop window and on every decent restaurant's wine list. Jordan Michelman, I know you're a fan of rosé. I'm sure you've been watching how it's been just exploding every summer season, selling more and more. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping you will join me, though, to make rosé a year-round wine. What do you think?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you. My favorite time of the year to drink rosé is in like January, February. I love like a winter weight rosé, like big rosé in the cold weather. That's also like my favorite time to drink like a rosé champagne. Like that's the perfect time of year to drink like pink champagne. But I think that if the internet listicle is to blame, or at least partially to blame, for the like 5 rosés you have to try this summer thing, that we can look to literature as a rebuttal. And so I did a little bit of research for the show and was reading about how rosé was the like house drink for the Lost Generation writers in Paris in the 20s. Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound. The Hemingway memoir Movable Feast has like dozens of mentions of white and rosé wines all throughout it. And he was famously drinking rosé in a cafe in Paris when he wrote The Sun Also Rises. As a wine drinker and somebody trying to learn how to write about wine, I've been very influenced by the wine writing of the novelist Jay McInerney, who's written for House and Garden and Wall Street Journal and Vanity Fair, a million other places. And in one of his essay collections called The Juice, he has an essay about one of his own kind of food and life writing heroes, A.J. Liebling, who was best known as a war reporter, World War II, and sports writer, and coined the phrase the sweet science for boxing. But he wrote this amazing book called Between Meals that is like a love letter to rosé, and especially Tavel rosé from the AOC Tavel, which is just across the Rhone from Chateau Neuf de Pape. And I love those wines too. And I think that there's something about maybe re-intellectualizing rosé, or this idea that it has history and has inspired a lot of kind of great thought and thinking, that I'm cool with the pop version of it too. I think it's fine.
Which we're drinking right now.
Yes, very much so. But it has this long, rich history as being an engine for great thought and literature and things like that. And I think that owning that part of rosé's history maybe is something that we can talk about a little bit more, or people can give a little bit more ownership to.
Oh, I love that. You're elevating it beyond the beach wine, which you kind of associate in your mind with the beach read. It's just sort of light and fluffy and meaningless, but I love that.
There's a quote from Between Meals where Liebling describes Tavel rosé, and he says, "The taste is warm but dry, like an enthusiasm held under restraint. And there is a tantalizing suspicion of bitterness when the wine hits the top of the palate."
I have to say Tavel is my Thanksgiving go-to wine. So I'm
cool.
so happy to hear that.
Amazing.
So would that be a winter weight rosé, or what's a good example of a winter weight rosé? This is kind of...
Sure. I think that the Tavel stuff is having it be built on... so in Tavel, it's primarily Grenache, but they do Cinsault and Mourvedre, and a little bit of Syrah is allowed now too. typically it's got a little bit of just like volume to it. It's not like a slight sipper. There's going to be some residual sugar. The Tavel stuff that I really love is from a winemaker called Eric Pfifferling, who makes wines as Langlore, L'Anglore. And his Tavel is like so beautiful and delicious. He throws in a little bit of white grapes in there too, which is like in the old style of how to lighten a big red blend. But it's juicy, it's really fresh, but it's like big, and you definitely get a sense that you could drink it when it was cold outside. It's also like unfindable, like hip as hip can be wine bar wine, and very difficult to get.
Which
highly
means
allocated.
only you can find it.
It means I get to hunt for it. Yeah, it's like it's fun. It's fun to try to look for. But I love all that stuff. I think also like the another like reference from literature, but maybe a little bit more recent, like in Kermit Lynch's book on the wine route, like the most beautiful chapter in it is where he is at Domaine Tempier or Tempier, however you pronounce it. But they're in Provence, and like that whole story of that family and his experience there and stuff. Those wines, which are based almost entirely on Mourvedre, I think more than 50% on Mourvedre, are like very serious, ageable, grown-up rosé wines. And I think like, in as much as like you have to sort of be like pretty into wine to be blindfolding people to drink it in the first place, like it's definitely like you can blindfold someone and they might not tell you that it was a rosé, versus like what we're drinking today from the sample letter like could only be rosé. Like if you know.
Okay, Hannah, fair weather rosé drinker. Are you starting to be convinced?
Maybe a little bit, but I think when the temperature is cold out, I always gravitate towards a big red, and I think the room temperature nature of it is part of the thing. Like having a cold wine on a cold day just doesn't sound cozy to me. So that's going to be hard to change my mind, because rosés always serve cold, right? You're not saying that we should have it at room temperature.
Well, I mean, how you define cold or how you define room temperature depends on the room and the fridge and all that kind of stuff.
I think we have an expert in temperature over here.
Well, only outside, not inside. I just to chime in on this, I drink rosé all year long. I don't even think about it very much. I very much like to have either a white wine or a rosé to start my evening with, and then to finish with a red. But I don't consider rosé a summer wine. I think I tend to migrate to it a little bit easier and quicker in the summer, but it's on my list all year long.
I have noticed just the past few years that the better restaurants, at least in Portland, have quite a few rosés on their list, January, February, all year round. Yeah. Which I think is a fairly new phenomenon.
Which is not to say that there aren't rosés that are lovely to drink in the summertime, and or that it can't taste, that it's not really nice with hot weather. I think that it has that versatility. The winemakers Arno Roberts down in California, they make this Touriga Nacional rosé that's like pink bubble gum magic delicious, like and that's from like not super common grape that's made into wine here in America, and they're making like really pretty wine for it. It's also helpful because those wines are typically retailing in the $60 to $80 to $100 range for their Cabernets, but their rosé is like $25. So if you want to get in the door for a high-end or high-end-ish winemaker like Arno Roberts, like the rosé is a great way in, and it's like delicious.
Just another perspective on some of this, Jordan. Rosé, from some things that I've read in the old world, rosé was always something that you could make easily, even from fruit that didn't ripen fully.
Right.
And so if you think about it, people purposely make rosé today.
Yeah.
But it's still this natural kind of hedge in your business that if you're growing something like Grenache and the year is not ripening it really well, you have a secondary market that you can make a wine for.
Or if there's a wildfire.
Or if there's wildfire, yeah. So, I think that it's a really interesting category of wine and how it's developed over time.
That's absolutely right, Dr. Jones. And you're saying, like, thinking about going back to like the writers in Paris I was mentioning, like they weren't drinking it on purpose. It's because it was like the wine bar plonk. Like when you're drinking wine by the half liter or the liter, like Hemingway talks about, like that's what they were bringing.
The house wine.
That's what they were bringing you.
Sure.
But there's something kind of lovely about that, or something very sort of democratic about that, which I think is part of the fun.
Well, and they were probably, I mean, I don't know if they were even bottling it. They might have been just throwing it in a barrel. It might have been just, winemakers now will bottle a rosé in February, but they might have just thrown it in a barrel and delivered it to a bar, and there you go.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I have a little insider tip for people who like the light, fresh style, which sometimes is not so good in the winter because it really doesn't last longer than 6 months. Just drink a Southern Hemisphere rosé in the winter. So Chile, Argentina, they'll send some delicious rosés up north, and you can enjoy them, and they'll be fresh and young. So, Hannah, I have a rosé for you to drink in the winter.
Thank you.
Have you ever tried Cerasuolo d'Abruzzo?
I don't think so.
There are like a bunch of rosés that are basically just light red wines, and this is one of them. Okay. It's the Montepulciano grape, but we were talking about skin contact earlier. I love how all of our topics are sort of intertwined today. Yeah. This is one of those rosés that gets a little more skin contact, and it's just basically a young version of a regular red from Abruzzo. So.
Awesome. I'm going to try it.
Anyone else have any favorites they want to recommend?
I was going to throw out some of the stuff that I really love for rosé is from Italy, so they'd call it rosato in Italy, but being made in the Lazio with the Aleatico grape, which is one of these old grape varieties that people are sort of reclaiming their regional rights to it to be able to grow it and make it. And there's a couple of really amazing winemakers there. The Lazio is right on the border with Tuscany, in like the kind of middle-ish of Italy, and like the ankle, or maybe not the ankle. I was trying to think about the boot. Yeah, like the calf. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect. Lacoste, Lecoste, make beautiful Aleatico rosato. Some that are in like big format, like total party wine, fun, easy to drink, residual sugar sweetness, but like for a party, for a big group. A winemaker there called Andrea Occhipinti. So the other Occhipinti, not the famous, very, very famous one in Sicily, but the other Occhipinti, no relation, but makes wines there in Gradoli in the Lazio, and does beautiful work with Aleatico for a rosato, and also for makes incredible white expression of Aleatico there that's like delicious.
I'm a big fan of cool. Cameron's Ramato, which is, I think, a rosé. It might be made slightly differently, but it's delicious.
Ramato is an orange wine. But it might be made with Pinot Gris, which has pink skins. So
it is with Pinot Gris.
That's what it is.
Again, coming back to skin contact, it's just basically making a white wine the way you'd make a red. Kind of fun.
And I hear that Abasella has a great Grenache rosé, so I can't wait to try that.
I'm glad I didn't have to say that. I really do like Grenache rosés, probably about the best. But, you can find every now and then a really good Sangiovese rosé. And I think that we have some places in the Pacific Northwest that don't ripen it fully as a red grape. For red wine, but really can make a spectacular rosé. And there's a few in Washington, a few here in Oregon. None of them, the names are coming to my mind right now, but they're out there.
I think Barnard Griffin does one. Do you guys know Barnard Griffin?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, those have those nice kind of savory, leathery notes.
I like that one.
They're good with barbecue.
Yum.
Yum. I think this is a great note to move on to our dessert course, in which we each share something foodie or drinky we have been enjoying this week. Mine is that yesterday afternoon, I finally went to the Jacobsen Salt showroom. Have you all been there?
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful.
Jacobsen, I think you can buy anywhere in the U.S. It's this wonderful sea salt that's harvested at Netart's Bay in Oregon.
I just wrote about them, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, well, you should be talking.
No. Go.
I just love this. It's such a Portland experience. You just walk into this warehouse, and it's kind of crumbling brick walls, and I think they're packaging salt on one side of it, and then there's like a Williams-Sonoma demonstration area, and then they do like morning yoga and meditation classes for people who work.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
And then they have just free happy hours. every couple of weeks where people just show up and you don't have to pay anything. They just serve drinks, and it's just...
Is that just for staff only, or?
No, it's for whoever is on their list.
Oh, wow.
It's just so Portland. Everything's just sort of groovy. I walked in and everyone was, dressed and much cooler than I was, standing around sort of like arranging things and taking photos. And I just thought, I need to just spend more time here, and I think it might make me cooler. Anyway, what did you bring for dessert, Dr. Jones?
Well, I guess I forgot about desserts because when you brought that up again, I just immediately went to this hamburger I had. It really did stand out. It was at the Atticus Hotel, the little dining area that they have there. But
Where's the Atticus Hotel?
In McMinnville, Oregon. Sorry.
But it's just opened, right?
Yeah, just opened. So my mind went first to there. But I did have some Thai food in a restaurant in McMinnville called Thai Country this past week with a Pinot Blanc from the Willamette Valley that was just lovely.
Oh, I like that pairing. Mm-hmm. Hannah, how about you?
Okay, I brought two things, one of which is Enoteca Nostrana. If anyone who knows me knows that I love Nostrana. It's one of my all-time favorite Portland restaurants, and I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for Enoteca Nostrana to open up, and it opened up about a month ago, and it's just lovely. And there's about 20 natural wines by the glass. Yeah. It's such a beautiful, sexy, sleek space, just gorgeous. And you can also get Kathy Wims' food, so it's what's not to love. I think there's like 120 bottles that you can get from their wine list, and you can also get 100 from Nostrana's wine list. So there's a lot of choices, and I like the wine by the glass thing because you can also get half glasses, which not a lot of places do still, which I don't understand why everyone doesn't do that. Because I love to try new wines, and so it's nice to be able to have a little bit, and then if you really like it, you can commit to the full. And the second thing that I brought is I'm totally obsessed with this coffee shop. You've probably heard of it, Jordan. It's called Never Coffee. It's right across from my the yoga studio that I go to, and every Saturday after my yoga class, I go and I spend $6 on a latte called the Holy Grail. Yeah. And the Holy Grail has turmeric, ginger, orange blossom, Be Local cherry wood smoked honey, Jacobson sea salt, and Telecherry pepper. And I got it once because I thought, I had a little bit of a sore throat coming on, and I was like, I need something slightly healthy. It has turmeric and honey, and I'm just now totally obsessed with that coffee. Every time I go in there, they have all these other amazing drinks too, and they're served in these gorgeous ceramic mugs made by a local ceramic maker. And I love that Holy Grail. It's like my Holy Grail.
That's a perfect Portland beverage. That's nice. How about you, Jordan?
Well, so I was trying to think about what to say for this, and I feel bad because it's a little bit of a shameless plug, but it's really where my head's been at the last couple of days. We published this story today on Sprudge that I'm like so thrilled about, and I just want to crow about it a little bit, from a writer in Northern California named Jenny Eagleton, and she went out to a place in Yuba County, an hour and a half or so north of Sacramento, called the Renaissance Winery, which has been making wine there since the early 70s, and it is owned and operated by what I'm informed by our attorneys we should not call a cult, but former members have described it in quotes to us as a cult. So called the Fellowship of Friends. They own 1,300 acres in Yuba County on the edge of the Sierra National Forest. And they make wine out there. They have since the early 70s. And one of their winemakers for many years, starting in the late 80s, until about 10 years ago, is a guy named Gideon Beanstalk, who went on to open a winery called Clos Saran. You can trace some of the roots of what's happening today for natural wine in America back to the Fellowship of Friends and the Renaissance Winery out in Yuba County. And so in honor of many people here in Oregon, especially, are paying attention to the Wild, Wild Country documentary about the Rajneeshis. So this story that ran today on Sprudge is called Wild, Wild Wine Country.
Oh, nice.
Came out today, and I'm like, we've been like in with the lawyers and all this stuff over the last 2 weeks to get it all ready and perfect, and it ran right before I came into the studio today. So,
oh my gosh, I can't wait to read that.
Please do.
Sounds fascinating.
We're happy with it, and I hope we don't get sued. And we did not call them a cult.
They're not a cult.
Other people were quoted as calling them.
We're a cult here, but no. Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jordan Michelman, everyone, check out Sprudge.com. I was going to tell everyone to check out Sprudge.com anyway, because it covers basically my two favorite beverages, coffee and wine.
Yes, I appreciate that.
And Hannah Wallace, you have been killing it with your wine industry coverage for 750 Daily. I have to log roll for 750 Daily.
Yeah.
And you were just down at Linfield College, weren't you?
No, I didn't go down, but I will have a Q&A with the director of the archives, Rich Schmidt, coming out soon on 750 Daily.
So great.
Yeah.
Those archives are amazing.
Yeah.
And speaking of Linfield College, Dr. Greg Jones, who really is the world's foremost vineyard climatologist. It's pretty exciting to have you in the studio. Today's episode was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, in the studios of OPB. You can read all about us on the OPB website. Our editor is Alex Ward, and special thanks to OPB's sound supervisor, Stephen Cray. And our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. Hey everybody, I've got some homework for you. Go to our Facebook page and fill out our listener survey. It will help us to get more of the content you love to you, and the more of you who respond, the more it helps our show. We want to know why you waste your time listening to us. And if you haven't already, please rate our James Beard Award-winning show on iTunes. Subscribe to The Four Top on your favorite podcast app, and tell your friends about us. Tweet us or post on our Facebook page or on our Instagram feed. We want to hear everything you want to share with us. Bye-bye now.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit